Hey, FlimsyLunchTray here with a continuation of our How to Map series. And today's video is part 2, and we are going to be talking about carriers in part 2, and the map being Greece. So, really excited to talk about this today, and sharing different things regarding the map and how carriers, players will tend to interact with this map with positioning, moving up, so on and so forth. So as you can see here, we have a picture that Wargaming provided for a ranked battle season. And we have 8 ships on the screen. So know that what I'm going to share here will usually always reference and relate to what you will see in ranked battles and also random battles. Somewhat clan battles, but maybe not, because clans tend to play really uniquely, definitely regards to how much communication they have as a clan, so on and so forth. So no, what you'll most usually see in regards to ranked and random battles is what you're going to find here on Greece with the positioning. So we're going to be using a editing drawing feature where I'm going to be, it'll look kind of maybe like football, soccer or something, with moving along lines, drawing lines, positioning, so on and so forth. So I hope you guys appreciate me being able to use the picture editing drawing editing mode for this while recording the video and talking with you guys. So the first thing, and every time that I have a part 2 in a How to Map series, it's essentially going to be talking about carriers, whoever, Greece, northern waters, ocean, so on and so forth. But part 2 is always going to be carriers. And my goal in starting off with part 2 carriers and beginning is just saying up front to you guys, those of you who play carriers, is that out of all the other ship types in the game, you have the most time for map awareness of any of the other players. Because you have, the mini map that would be here. And you should always be watching that as a CV player to see how is the enemy team moving. Are they pushing? Are they flanking your team? And the flank you're on is crumbling and you need to get out ASAP. So you don't have any excuse as a carrier player to not be paying attention to that mini map and seeing what's unfolding in the midst of the battle. Because you have 10, 15, 20, 30 seconds between your flight squadrons launching to get to your enemy target. And we'll talk more about that here in a minute. So on Greece, and this was probably going to be for most different maps as well, but particularly here on Greece we're talking about today, is that there are 3 CV positions that you'll tend to find carrier players do here. And so the first is where we are at now, and that is spawn. This tends to be position number 1. That you'll see where carrier players, they don't move, they just instantly start the battle, and they'll stay somewhere in this area in general. If you started over here, you started over here, or maybe there's 2 CVs in the battle. It's like they tend to stay in spawn and sit there. The second position you'll see with more, maybe perhaps more the increased BB sniping meta that we're currently in as of update 0.10.0 with Deadeye, but soon Deadeye is supposed to change as we record this video. The second position that you'll tend to find carrier players go to is that they will go to these islands here on the side of the map, where they'll position themselves there. So if they do get spotted by the enemy CV, and let's say, on Greece, you're going to find tiers 8 through 10, a Musashi player, a Vermont player, if you're just sitting here in spawn and they enemy carrier spots you, or worse, maybe enemy destroyer spots you, they can lob shells on you, and you're kind of vulnerable in the spawn area if you're just sitting there. And so the number 2 position, as I draw really bad numbers, tends to be behind these 2 islands, because if you do get spotted by air, by destroyer, the battleships usually can't punish you because you have these islands protecting you because you're parked behind them. The third positioning that you'll tend to see, these number 1, number 2 are definitely the most popular. The third type of positioning you'll see is if you have a CV player who is paying attention to the map and sees what's unfolding during the battle. Let's say his team's pushing through BC cap and their enemy team's falling apart. Rather than just sitting here in spawn or over here, is that they'll tend to follow their team. So kind of island hop, right? Or maybe they're like there, and then as their team maybe pushes even more further up, they'll even move, continue to move along the line. So this is the number 3 positioning that you continue to see, where it's the carrier player who's just moving up following his team. And the same as, say opposite on this side, kind of island hop, move up to the island till you're certain that your team has secured this outer area. And then continuing to move up, so forth. And we'll also talk about this from the enemy team's perspective as well here in the map. But we're first going to start this way. Well, I guess we can probably go ahead and draw it now. So then what you tend to see from the enemy team, so it's a red-orange, more red. Same concept, just a little different. You have carriers, players sitting in the spawn, position number 1. And then either moving to here, to position number 2. Somewhere around these 2 islands. Or doing the same thing as if their team is pushing further up on one flank, then they'll try to follow them, do that little bit of island hopping, just basically following what the other team would do. It's in this type of position. So yeah, do something like that. So you can kind of see those, you know, that you have that similarity here, right? Where if you have a flank falling apart, a wise aircraft carrier player, in my opinion, will move with his team along that flank. So this is generally what you tend to see happening in regards to the general map positions. Now, there is a 4th exception, and I rarely see this one. Like, I rarely see it. I saw it in a ranked battle, and I was a destroyer player, and I was, I think, Shimikaze, and I was moving in on here, where the CV player, and I think he did this exceptionally well, is that he actually, as the battle progressed, he was back here, he actually took a really aggressive stance where he actually moved in here. And as I was coming across this way with my Shimikaze, he asked me, hey, can you smoke me up? There's a Venezia that was still alive, kind of pinned here with another destroyer and a cruiser battleship with me. And so I smoked him up. And then he was really close because this flank had fallen apart. And the enemy team, there's just 1 or 2 ships left over here. So you'll sometimes see that, but it's uncommon. I've rarely seen it. So just know that you tend to have that 4th exception, and where you might see something like that happen on a map like this, where they have a shorter cycle of getting new aircraft squadrons into the battle. So potential higher damage, but at the risk of their carrier being closer. Now, when you look at this situation, you can see, just in general from what we've drawn, is that carrier players tend to play along the map borders. You'll rarely ever see, like for the map Greece, you'll rarely ever see a carrier move up in the center area, right? Because as we talked about in part 1, is that you have all these type of crossfires going on. So if a carrier player decides to come down, you know, here or even here, as soon as, you know, he's coming in range of cruisers now that will have more domination to this area versus battleships or destroyers who move up along the lines here, is that they're much more greater risk because carrier players, they want to protect their health pool. So they tend to work along these flanks, along the map edges, because it keeps them out of harm's way. So because of that, let's see here. How do I want to go from this? This is how you'll tend to see, we're going to talk about battleships, cruisers, and destroyers, and how they interact with CVs on the map, so you as a carrier player know what to expect. Let's see, I don't want to have too many lines on the map. Let's see, I'm actually going to do this. So, you know, you've seen what we've done here. I just want to get rid of these lines in particular. For example, let's say you are on this side of the map, and you're a carrier who's done positions 1 or 2, or maybe even 3, depending on how the battle's gone. But usually, let's just say you're stuck with 1 or 2. There are destroyer players in the game, let's use a slightly different color, that have a hard-on for CV players. So destroyer players, when they start out off here, is that usually they want to get the cap first. That's usually the number one goal for destroyer players, is they want to get the cap first, right? But if they have a hard-on and wanting to get the CV, and for some reason this tends to always be Japanese destroyer players, especially like higher tiers, like tier 10 Shimakaze players. I always see Shimakaze players do this, and I don't know why. Is that once they've maybe perhaps secured these first 2 caps, is that the Shimakaze player, the destroyer player who wants to get you in your CV, is that they'll tend to move along this outer edge line. Subconsciously, a lot of destroyer players don't realize is that they're actually kind of retracing the line steps that a carrier player would take, because they are going along the edge, right? Because that's map borders is where you tend to find carrier players. So you have destroyer players that will take this line, and their goal is to hunt down and find you until they're able to kill you. What this does is, when a destroyer player moves himself, let's say, in this instance, you only have 2 destroyers, is that if one destroyer went here, one goes here, and he just wants to kill the CV, and he takes this outer line, is that he's not screening for his team anymore with other destroyers that are going to be moving up. Let's say, for example, on your team, who are going to be pushing forward, taking the cap. And so that allows that enemy destroyer to push in a little bit farther, or your destroyer to push in farther, and it's put his team at risk because he's no longer screening. And besides a destroyer player who tries to take this outer line, he's wasted, he could waste 5 to 10 minutes before he actually finally gets back here and trying to take out the CV. Because the area of influence that a carrier tends to have is that, if you're, it depends on your positioning, of course, but it tends to be something like this. And most of the time, a carrier player, it's really in like this line, like, for example, if he's positioned there, or even here. Well, I don't want to draw too many lines on here for you guys, but it tends to be, if they're positioned here, their planes are going directly from here. If they're here, they tend to be going this way. And so these outer traced lines, the edges that the padding they might take, are pretty open. And so a destroyer player, like a Shimakaze, doesn't really have to worry about being detected moving up. So if you're in a carrier and you're at position 1, 2, or 3, generally speaking 1 or 2, and you don't see the enemy destroyer on their team for, let's say, several minutes, and you're wondering, hey, where is he at? I've not spotted him with my planes, and I've been flying around in this area. Where is he gone? That could be a kind of a red alert moment that he could be potentially moving up on your side flank, and he's seeking to take you out. So that's something you have to really be mindful as a carrier player, is if you get those type of destroyer players who will do that. Because generally speaking, when a destroyer player tends to make this move, it means that your flank is rather weak on this side of the map. So if I have, let's say, you have 8 here, let's say 5 members of your team go this way, and only 3 go this way, then in this position, I'm going to either stay here and spawn, or I'm actually going to just go ahead and come over here on the island. If I only have 3 of my 8 teammates going this way, I'm not going to move to position 2. I'm going to stay in position 1 or position 2 because I know I have more of my friendlies guarding me from any potential threats, especially like a move that a destroyer would make. And the same holds true with the opposite team, right? Opposing team. So if you're on, or if your destroyer decides to make the move, sorry, get that straight. So if your destroyer decides to do go after the carrier, he's just basically going to be following this trail, as I chose the wrong color. Oh, eraser. Let's go with a darker green. He's basically just going to be retracing the steps again, going out on the edge and working in until they get you. So it's basically the same. It's just once they're like, this area is where they tend to enter that. Now, the one thing that tends to happen, let's say if you're a carrier player and you've just sat here the entire time and this flank has completely folded, you can bet you if that destroyer player knows that you're sitting here, he's just going to make a beeline right for you, right? So that's where map awareness comes in and where you need to be with where your team is strongest at, and being able to protect your health pool. Because one of the things is that carrier players is that, you know, they can have such a huge effect on the battle, but they hardly ever put their own health pool at risk, which is rather annoying in certain regards. So we talked about destroyers, let's talk about cruisers. Cruisers don't tend to be as big as a threat as destroyer or battleship players, or maybe even enemy carriers tend to be, because the area of affluence that a cruiser player tends to have is more this central area. So if you're in position 1 or position 2, generally you're safe. And when I say that the ideal position is, honestly, it's behind these islands. Again, depending on how the battle's flowing and how your team's moving, then you don't really have to worry about cruisers as much, because cruisers don't have as long as firing range as battleships do, and then they can't move up undetected as easily as, say, a destroyer can. Because we've talked about with cruisers, right? Now cruisers, and that will be part 4, but in our opening map overview, is that cruisers tend to have position themselves, you know, kind of like here, and let's say, you know, it could be even over here. So that's where you tend to find cruisers at. And as I talk about positioning for these ships too, and you're a carrier player, know that I'm also giving you this as information to know where you tend to find those types of targets. But because you move around so quickly on the map, it tends to be pretty easily for you to figure that out yourself, especially if you have destroyers spotting as well. So you tend to find cruisers in these central areas. So they don't pose as threats, and sometimes they don't have as far as range like the battleship players do. Now, when it comes to talking about battleships, battleship players, you know, for example, like I was kind of talking about, you know, if you're dealing, this is a tier 8 through tier 10 map, you know, find something of the likes of, you know, even arguably a North Carolina, Musashi, Vermont, Yamato player, is if you're in this position 1 spawn as battleship players, you know, they tend to kind of have more of a central focus. Maybe if you have more battleships like in a random, maybe, you know, they're kind of fanning out a bit more to try to help maybe get a crossfire going, while cruisers kind of hold these more central positions. Is that if you're, let's say the carrier spots you, you decided to stay in spawn, and because battleship players have already moved up, if they catch you, they're going to fire at your position, because battleship players don't really tend to care for CVs. So if you just sit there, been detected by enemy destroyer or carrier planes, you're at risk because the battleship players can just fire on your position because you're not in a more secure position like behind these islands. Now it is important to note, let's say I'm on this team, I'm in a battleship and I'm here. My carrier player flies over here, he's attacking cruisers here, and my carrier player spots you here. And then the carrier planes, my allies' carrier's planes, they get shot down, he's gone, and now you're undetected. But that whole time you were detected, you didn't move. And let's say I'm sitting here and I don't have any other targets to shoot at. I will use the mini map where you have the reticle of kind of showing where your shots are going to land. And I will use the mini map and I will position my reticle over the last known position of your carrier ship. And I will fire, and half the time I'm going to hit you. Because when I'm in a carrier, and my run rate in carriers, as every time I play them, sucks. And it's like 48% run rate. But I'm an observant player. I watch and see what happens in the map. If that situation happens to me and I'm in a CV and I got detected, and I'm not going to sit still. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to back up if I'm sitting in spawn, because I know that it's possible for a player who might shoot the last known location they saw me on the map, because that's what I would do. So that's something that you want to keep in mind. And if you move to position 2, you don't have to worry about that, right? That's one less thing as a carrier player that you have to, one less thing you have to worry about. And the same is here when you have battleship players, is that, they'll tend to, this area, you could have one decides to move over here, one that moves more this way, one that's more working this flank. And so the same holds true, just as we talked about over here. Now, carrier players, specifically as I work to wrap this up, is that no matter where you move out on the map, if a carrier player wants to attack you and sink you, the carrier player is at least going to be able to go after you pretty hard and attacking you, right? Especially if he's detecting you for his battleship teammates, or if he's in a division, kind of like what you saw in the 899 division. And if I say 889 division, you have no idea what I'm talking about. YouTube that. I think it's, was it Euro who did that? I'm not sure. But anyhow, it's basically a division built to kill enemy carriers. So, if you're sitting here in these defensive positions and the enemy carrier decides, to fly his squadrons against you, there's really nothing preventing him from coming and striking you. And that's why it's nice, like if your team, for example, if most of your team has broken into these 2 areas, then that forces the carrier player, he's basically got to fly through your team in order to get to you. So that's putting his planes at risk, and he's not as likely to do that when you're in these positions too, because if you're sitting in position 1 and he's able to fly straight through and he has to deal with less AA, then he's able to come through and strike you. So that's why, again, position 2 is rather nice in that regard, to get more behind AA bubbles from your teammates. And what's nice as well, if you have a carrier player who's really focused on taking you out as a carrier player, in those rare maps where sometimes, or matchmaking, where it gives you 2 carriers, so 4 carriers in total, sometimes I've seen other carrier players where they'll go sit in position together. Maybe they both go to number 2 here or number 2 here, so on and so forth, and then they double up their AA, and then it's really hard for a carrier player to break through to that. But generally speaking, you have 2 carriers you want to be able to split up and both be able to effectively support your team. So this is typically what you find on Greece in regards to carriers. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this video. And again, I'm pretty sure I've talked about everything I've needed to talk about thus far as we start off this new series. I'm learning with you guys as we talk about these things. And again, as a carrier player, the key to any carrier player is having map awareness. It's paying attention to the mini map and seeing what is happening on the map, and if the enemy team. Oh yeah, let's talk about that real quick. If the enemy team is, or no, let's say your team. Let's try that again. Let's say your team. Your team has a really strong foothold, and they're pushing up here. If I'm in a carrier, and I'm sitting in spawner over here, because my team has a really established stronghold there, then I'm going to move up, and I'm going to be in support with my team, right? At the same time, sometimes this happens as well, where the enemy team can be pushing. It's like a clock, right? As you move, well, I don't know if I can actually say it's like a clock, but it's an adverse reaction. Let's say if your team's pushing up more on this flank and moving forward, and then it's forcing the enemy team. Maybe they're pushing more this way, or they could just totally be losing map control, where your team is actually more like, color back up, like this, and the enemy team is mostly just corralled up in this area. Then you're pretty safe, but I tend to like to push as a carrier player with my team and being able to support them more effectively, especially where I have more team members on one flank versus the other. And so the same holds true if the enemy team, if I'm sitting in position 1 or position 2 here, and the enemy team is pushing up really strongly here, and I'm still sitting in position 1 or 2, yeah, you're screwed. It's too late for you. Because you should have been paying attention to the map sooner to know that the enemy team was moving up, and now your chances of actually getting out of a situation are super slim, because if you find yourself in a position where the enemy team's pushing and you catch it sooner, ideally if you're in position 1 or position 2, especially position 2, is you want to move more like so, versus just, oh, I got to catch up with my team, and then you just put yourself closer to the enemy team being on fire on your position. So yeah, so that's going to bring us to an end there. As I continue to go with this series with you guys, we'll learn more about this together, and how I can best present this information to you in a really clear and concise way, because I definitely don't want to get wordy or make these videos longer than what they have to be. But today we've talked about part 2, carriers. So if you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. Subscribe if you want to see more. If you haven't subscribed, thanks so much. Comment. Always feel free to comment on the videos. I always really appreciate hearing your feedback, whether it is positive or if it is a critique, and maybe how I can make this video series a bit better, and talking about the different maps. So yeah, so that's gonna wrap it up. So thanks so much for being with us here today, and we'll catch you next time. Take care.